Welcome. This video covers SAS options. We've been using options throughout this course to change our output or specify certain things that should happen. For instance, we've been using a data equal options on many of our different procs. And how do we know that that's the syntax that we should use, generally speaking, for this kind of thing? We've seen that we can use options also after a slash sometimes. How do we know when to use it after a slash? And then lastly, we saw on the data set options that we have these weird parentheses that we then need to put our options in. How do we know what to do and where do we go to figure that out? Well, unfortunately, we have to look at the documentation. The documentation is going to tell us exactly how to specify our SAS options to customize our output. Whenever you look into the SAS documentation, you're going to see a couple different ways that they tell you how to use options. One of them will look like this. What you see up here. There'll be a statement or keyword, and then you'll just have carets with the word options in between. And this just means that the option should go directly after that keyword. One example is in ProcFreak. If you look at the help for that, you'll see ProcFreak and then caret options. That means the options that you put on the ProcFreak statement should just go directly after ProcFreak. For instance, we've been using the data option, and so we use data equal data, whatever that data set happens to be. And then there's another option you might want to do, which would be no print. Maybe you just want to output your contingency tables to new data sets, but you don't want to actually get the output printed out to you. So you could use the no print option. So here we're doing two separate options on the ProcFreak statement. Again, if you have these carets, that's exactly what you do. Alternatively, you'll see carets and then a slash options. When you see that, that means that you should put your options after a /. On the table statement of ProcFreak, if you look at the help for that, you'll see tables, requests, and then caret/options. So any type of option we want to put to customize our tables should go after a slash in this case. For instance, we saw how to output our contingency table to a data set. We did /out equal to a. So in this case, this is our option that we're going to utilize here. And then the other one that tends to get a little bit harder to deal with are the ones that have parentheses. So if you see statement or keyword and then options in parentheses, that means that you need to use parentheses and put whatever inside of those. We're going to utilize this proc univariate procedure here in a minute to do some summaries on numeric variables. But proc univariate has carets and then options after it, which means that whatever options I'm going to do should come directly after proc univariate. But if I want to use the trim option, so I could use trim equal values, but then trim actually has its own set of options on it. And you can see that those options go in parentheses. And that's basically to make sure that those options are not confused with something that would be an option for proc univariate. Now, if I wanted to actually specify this, I might do something like this. Here's my option on proc univariate. And then over here, these are now my options on my option on trim. And this can get a little bit confusing, but as you start to use SAS more and more, as you start to go to the documentation when you're learning a new procedure, this becomes clearer and clearer, and it becomes pretty easy to do after a while. But again, it gets a little bit confusing, especially when you have things like options on options. We'll keep going through more examples of this as the course goes on, and hopefully it'll get a little bit easier. Let's look in a little bit more detail at the actual documentation itself, because it's important if you're going to try to learn something new that you have an idea what to look for. Almost every statement that you're going to do in SAS on whatever procedure you're going to do has some options associated with it. On ProcFreak, if you go to the options for that, there will be a whole list of them that you can do. And here are some of them up here at the top. The ones that we used on the previous page were the data equal and the no print option. Again, if you're looking at how to read this, our option should go directly after ProcFreak. And then if I want to use data, I should specify data equal and then the name of that data set. And then if I want no print, I should just type no print. I don't need parentheses, I don't need an equal sign or anything else like that. If I wanted to do the order, I would need to do order equal something because that's the syntax for doing it. Again, unfortunately, we have to read this to understand and be able to learn how to do our own SAS coding. On the tables option, or the table statement, there are, again, plenty of options as well. Here are a few of them, and there are ones that will help us with dealing with the actual statistical analyses. We're not really handling that at this point or in this course. There are ones that then control the displayed output, and so those are ones that we will care about because we're just going to customize what our output looks like. And the ones that we'll focus on here are given in this highlighted section, and this is just going to allow us to suppress the display of certain summaries that are produced. And again, if we want to try to figure out how would I utilize this option, well, up here we're saying that our options should come after a slash. So if I want to suppress the display of column percentages, for instance, after my slash I can just put no call, and that will allow me to suppress that. And if I want to do more than one option, I can just list them out. If I did want to do something like utilize max levels, I do need to do max levels equals something. So again, this documentation is going to help us figure out exactly what to do. This allows us to customize our output. Here is one of the contingency tables we made in the last video, except with some of those extra things that maybe we don't care about suppressed. So here I've gotten rid of the column percentages, the row percentages, and the cumulative percentages. Now we're just left with the frequency and overall percent for each one. All right, let's just jump into SAS. We'll go into the documentation for a minute, try to do some new option that we haven't used before to make sure that we can sort of parse through that a little bit and learn how to do it. All right, here we are in SAS. We're ready to customize our frequency tables in ProcFreak. You can remember that SAS is going to help us when we're typing in things by, for instance, if I wanted to put a slash here and then a space, it's going to help me with statement options and things that I could do in this case. But if you're really trying to just get an idea of what could possibly be done, this is not the best way to learn how to do the options. The best way, unfortunately, is to go to the SAS help documentation. Best way to do this would be, say, SAS help of whatever procedure you want. So SAS help ProcFreak. And then documentation.sas.com is what you want. It's going to give you the best stuff. And it's going to load that up. It does take a minute. It's kind of interactive here. But this will now take us to that procedure's help page, the ProcFreak statement. And we can go up here to the syntax. And this allows us to look at every statement that's possible on, well, not every statement that's possible, but all of the common statements that you use on ProcFreak. And then you can click on that and learn what options that statement has. This is where I pulled this information before. So what we do to specify our tables is we do the table statement, and then requests represents what tables we want to produce. So what we do is we compose this of one variable or several variables separated by asterisks. This is telling us exactly how to utilize this table statement. Then our slash options, we can go down here to the options and look at all of the possible things that we could do. And there are lots and lots of options. Let's pick one out and try to do something interesting that we haven't done before. One thing we might do, perhaps we'll use this list option. So this is going to display a two-way table in list format instead of in the traditional way that it does automatically. Let's go ahead and add that to our previous step. I'll copy this. This was the same proc step that we ran in our last video. Now I'm going to add this option of slash lists. Again, knowing that we put list after a slash because that's what the documentation tells us to do. You can highlight that, run it. Now our results come in list output form rather than that contingency table that we saw before. So this just separates out our two-way table into how you might think about it in a data set instead of in a nicer looking form. Let's investigate one other option just to make sure we can read this SAS help and have an idea what to do. We're still going to be on the table statement where we specify our table and then our options go after a slash. But let's scroll down here and we'll utilize this chi-square option, which is going to allow us to change the chi-square test that gets associated with a contingency table analysis. Don't worry about what the actual statistics is that's happening here is doing. We just want to focus on the SAS help documentation. So we'll use chi-square to specify that we want to have this test done. And then there are options on chi-square that we then put in parentheses. For instance, we can change the degrees of freedom associated with the test. Why you'd want to do that in this case, I don't know, but again, we're focusing on reading the output here, or the help here to change the output. So how do we specify this? We put our degrees of freedom in parentheses, and then notice that it's degrees of freedom equal some number. So we need to specify what the degrees of freedom would be. Let's just say 10. And now this should give us additional output that we have now customized as well. So looking down here, we now have this chi-square test and we have specified the degrees of freedom associated with it. So that's great. Hopefully this is helping you put together how to customize your output a little bit better. All right, to recap, there are 3 major ways that you specify your options in SAS, and how to figure out what that way is by looking at the documentation. If you see your options in carets, you put the options directly after your statement or keyword. A slash options, it comes after a slash, and if you see parentheses, it goes within parentheses.